You're listening to another ASCI Lounge podcast.
Welcome to the ASCI Lounge. I'm Monique Fenech from Australasian Supply Chain Institute, and this is a very important new series of 6 podcast interviews with experts in supply chain and the food and grocery industry. Today, kicking off our podcast series, we have with us a very special guest on the ASCI Lounge, Rob Stummer, CEO of SYSPRO Australasia. Welcome, Rob.
Thanks, Monique. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
This is a joint project that we're running with the AFGC and 6 Degrees on the future of supply chain. It was a research report that we conducted this year, 2019, with those two parties to find out a little more about what's going on in our supply chains and also what we can expect into the future. So who better to have on that program than Rob Stummer. Rob, you have about 20 years of tech industry leadership experience under your belt, including having worked for IFS and KPMG, and you have an expertise in ERP, software as a service, and specialized supply chain management cloud solutions. So I think you're pretty well placed for this discussion. What do you think?
Oh, let's see how we go.
Not a problem. SYSPRO has been very generous to the ASCI community over the years. And Rob, did you know that in 2016, ASCI launched its first educational webinar series for the ASCI community with SYSPRO?
Yes, I was aware of that, and I think it's a really great initiative. And these type of surveys that you've just conducted with 6 Degrees are of great importance to the industry. It gives us a snapshot of what people are thinking that are hands-on in the space. So, I found some of the results quite alarming, to be honest with you, and we'll get to that as we get through the podcast. But some of the statistics and findings were quite fascinating, in my opinion.
Yeah, it was. SYSPRO's ERP solution is very unique in that it's been around for a very long time in Australia, actually longer than I thought. And it specialises in the supply chain, manufacturing, and distribution industries. Quite poignant to this research study as well, because the survey included 116 supply chain professionals. More than half of our participants were in leadership roles in companies with turning over $500 million or more. So really that's your sweet spot too, Rob. So in terms of what they saw as successful supply chains, I thought it was interesting that most of them, almost half, said it's about strategic thinking, agility, and good leadership, and data really rated highly as well.
Yeah, for me, as I said earlier, I found it fascinating that technology wasn't up there as the most important driver for some of these supply chain businesses. Whilst it's not surprising, because these businesses moving forward are going to have very, very strong leaders. That it's not just about buying the technology that's going to help them. It's about how you embed that technology into the operations, and clearly there's some form of what can you say? The people that are working in the industry feel they're going to lose their jobs, right? Let's face it. The technology is going to take over what the supply chain does, and I'll go into that once we get into my thoughts on where it's heading from a technology perspective. But what really surprised me was that only 10% felt that ethics was important within supply chain, and I guess that's an indication of the spectrum of who was interviewed or who did the survey. I think only 16% were Gen Y, and for me, having worked with a lot of Gen Ys now, that ethics is right up there as a high priority, as is technology. So, but I think what came out in this report was that the strategic use of the technology was more important than the technology itself. So I think that's a great thing, and the ability for these businesses to be agile is critical. But as you pointed out, Monique, the most important thing is leadership and how we control and embed this disruptive technology within the businesses, so that we don't pretty much take out the whole employment force that's on the ground within these organisations. It's about reskilling these people now, and whilst it's clearly obvious that a lot of jobs will go, no doubt about it. But in fact, I'm a believer that there'll be more jobs created than are going to be lost. So it's about retraining the workforce, which is going to be critical, and that's going to take really strong leadership to not scare people that and they jump too quickly out of these businesses.
Yeah, you're right. Automation is a big part of this story, and Coles have announced that they're going to have 2 automated fulfillment and distribution centers built that'll boost their online sales by $1 billion. I mean, that's where the jobs it's been said are really going to be affected in the warehousing space, and yeah, I can see why leadership and strategic thinking would be very, very important for success.
Yeah, and that's a fascinating stat about the Coles. What the productivity they're going to gain there and the efficiency gains from a dollar perspective. I mean, everyone listening to this podcast, will understand that supply chains effectively really at the heart of any company's operations, really. And for me, it's really about accessing real-time data moving forward. So all the best decisions and the managers need this data at their fingertips to have an effective supply chain. But from what I can see and talking to the industry, there are limitations, and those limitations largely revolve around the legacy technologies that they've got in place. And what that's doing is it's hindering the transparency around this real-time data. So I think the disruptive technologies that are coming to market now, that we're heavily involved in embedding into our software, um, they really have the potential to take over the supply chain management entirely, I reckon. And they are, as I said earlier, they're clearly disrupting the traditional supply chain. And I guess I'm going to say something quite controversial here, but I reckon within 5 years, let's say 5 to 10 years, probably 5 years, I reckon I reckon this whole supply chain function could be obsolete. And that really is about this digital disruption that's taking place, and a new foundation that has to be embedded into these companies. And as I said, for me, and all the experts that I talk to, it's about how can we say capturing, analyzing, having easy access, interpreting the data, because really, again, that data is going to fuel everything from process automation. We talk about predictive analytics these days. Everyone talks about artificial intelligence. No one knows really what it means, but artificial intelligence is going to be important. Robotics, clearly in this industry. All these technologies, they're going to take over supply chain management. So all the leading companies, and I speak to lots of them out there, they're exploring all these possibilities, about how to not just buy the technology for the sake of it, but really, if they're exploring the potential of these so-called disruptive technologies, how are they going to embed them into their current operations and do it in a way that that has real benefit, both short, medium, and long term. But it's more so for the long term, because I feel that some of these companies will actually fall off the cliff, and it's sad, but it will be true, because if you don't invest in this disruptive technology, you will become a casualty. You can't wait too long. If you think about Kodak, Nokia's of the world, they waited too long, and the same will be for the supply chain companies out there and this whole supply chain function. So they've got to get ahead of the curve here. Really important.
Yeah. I thought the survey was interesting. They said that only 51% rated their ability to identify and nurture talent, as 6 or more out of 10. So what that's saying to me is that they're not too confident about how to find the right people to do this job that you're talking about, because it's quite a skill set to be able to analyze data and analyze it in the way that makes good decisions for the organization. And 50% of them surveyed also didn't have any degrees. Not that that is the only thing, but what I'm saying to you is that how do they source and have the right people on their teams to take them on this journey so they're not redundant?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I do spend a lot of time, and have historically spent a lot of time talking to university students around the country, and and more specifically in the technology streams. I'd have to be honest, and they're all skilling up to take over these jobs, right? So, if you're currently an employer doing a lot of hands-on work within the supply chain function, you want to get yourself trained up very quickly. And my take is that the strong leaders in these businesses should be reskilling their current employment and workforce. I think it's really important to offer people the opportunity to go and retrain themselves in areas that we know are going to take over the supply chain. So, they will be casualties if they don't. And so it's up to the individuals within these businesses to start taking initiative and doing their own self-training. So they're ahead of the curve. Don't wait, otherwise you will miss out. And mark my words, all these smart Gen Ys and Gen Zs, they call them now, they're coming through and they'll take these jobs because they're training in this whole data analytics piece in particular. But, so I feel that reskilling is absolutely going to be critical to the industry. It is going to take a bit of investment, but absolutely critical for the survival of it.
Yeah, well, that's right. I'm still stuck on the point that you said we won't be having supply chain management.
Oh yeah, let me talk about that. It's when I say that, let me elaborate a little bit more, because that's very, very controversial, particularly for everyone listening to this. But I think one example is clearly that data sensors that people use already on machines, and for maintenance, and we deal with manufacturers a lot as well, obviously being one of our specializations. And it's about estimating and understanding when the machines are going to break down before they break down, so that downtime's minimized. Blockchain, you heard about, that's revolutionizing how we deal with all the supply networks. Robots, they're everywhere now. We hear about these robots coming up everywhere, and we're at National Manufacturing Week last week, and we had at a booth there. But the amount of robots that are surfacing, and they're assisting in helping productivity and efficiency gains, is huge, and that's been around for decades already, but it's only getting bigger and bigger. And the margins obviously getting bigger for these people as well when they take certain jobs out of the equation. But the cost of these robots is expensive as well. But we also look at and I spent a lot of time in the mining industry with my previous company, and the delivery drones and all the self-driving vehicles are massive. They're all here now, and they're real. And I was talking to some of the executives at Rio Tinto last week. They're obviously the global mining company, and they're always looking to see how these disruptive technologies can help them and automate pretty much the mine to port operations that they're doing. So they've got I looked at some of the stats they've got. They're using driverless trains. They've got robotic operators. They use cameras and lasers everywhere. They've got tracking sensors on pretty much everything. They're basically managing their whole supply chain remotely, believe it or not. But at the same time, they're big on safety, obviously. So doing this is really improving the safety, and it really eliminates a lot of the people having to work remotely, believe it or not. But have you heard of digital control towers, Monique?
Yeah, we just had a leadership series event yesterday, and Schneider Electric have one. They were represented on the panel discussion yesterday, and they were talking about their control tower and the fact that they've put a major risk and put a 25-year-old female in charge of their control tower. So there you go.
Yeah, look, I reckon this is a very, very cool concept. Well, it's not concept now; it's real, right? And what these control towers do is, effectively, you could call them a virtual decision center. In my words, again, they're providing what you could say is real-time, end-to-end visibility into the whole global supply chain. So this is big, right? What I see is that they're really the nerve center of operations of these businesses. And if I was to put it in perspective, one of these towers, or a typical tower, let's call it, it's basic. It's all it is a physical room, right? And it's staffed with a team of data analysts, right? And they work around the clock, 24/7. And just picture a room full of high definition screens, right? So all these screens are providing this real time information with 3D graphics on every step of the supply chain. From order to delivery, there's all these visual alerts coming up to warn if inventory is running short, if there's bottlenecks in processes, and it's telling them before it actually happens. So this is the fascinating part, right? So what it's enabling is the teams that are on the so-called front line, they're able to rectify situations really quickly before these potential problems come up and become real ones. So again, for me, it comes back to real-time data, right? This is what the future is: real-time data with what you could say now with the AI embedded in is unquestioned accuracy, right? So the accuracy around the artificial intelligence piece is spot on, right? But they can't keep their eye off the customer. Also, it's this relentless, I call it, customer focus and process excellence. But these control towers are real now, and they're very cool. And you'll see them pop up more and more with the bigger companies first of all. But I think they're going to be very prevalent in the coming years.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, mining really does have a lot of great examples of leading technology. And we had an event last week on this exact topic over in Perth. And they were talking about virtual reality headsets on the mine sites for people, fly in, fly out. You have so many people coming into your site, and for safety reasons, because you mentioned safety, for safety reasons, they have these headsets on that are able to give them YouTube clips of safety information in that particular area of the mine, which is a really fantastic way of ensuring that whoever comes on your site is getting briefed, in real time, like you say, because they are able to update and change that software whenever they like, so that everyone stays safe.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. And, I was very, very fortunate to be part of a group that toured Accenture, the high-tech facility in Singapore a couple of years ago, and we actually used these virtual reality headsets, and they are brilliant. And they're using them to a point where if a truck breaks down on a remote work site, the driver now gets out, throws on his headset, it goes straight back to base, and the base are telling him, right, move the screwdriver to the right and change that bolt, and they can fix it on the go real time. This is amazing. And they're training technicians using virtual reality now. It's fascinating, and as I said, I was very lucky to be able to experience some of that in Singapore a couple of years ago. So it's come a long way in 2 years, but yeah, it's fascinating.
It is fascinating, and it does remove the need for supply chain managers to be face to face with their partners. Like you say, they can be offshore or they can be anywhere. You can have a supply chain management team operating virtually.
Yeah, absolutely. Just back to the the control tower piece, because I think it's big here. Is we talked about mining companies being all over this, but we deal with a lot of manufacturers, obviously, and the industrial companies are also embracing this concept. Don't worry about that. One of the manufacturers that we deal with, they have more than 1 million parts and components per day go out the door, right? So that's big, and there's a control tower that flags potential supply chain issues for those guys as they arise. So basically what it does in real time is it calculates the effects of the problem, and it corrects it using, what can you say? It's predetermined actions basically, and it flags it and escalates it. So, we've also, I know a steel company also that have built, they've customized a scenario planning tool into its control tower platform, and what that does is it increases the supply chain responsiveness, you could say, and resilience. So, and what the most important thing is that it simulates almost how some major, pretty much unexpected equipment breakdowns are going to occur when they occur, and in the industry they're called the so-called big hits, that affects the business enormously from a profitability perspective. So this risk mitigation is huge in the whole supply chain piece. So I find that if you don't invest in this type of technology, you will fall behind. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, look, it's been a really interesting conversation. Thanks so much for joining us, Rob. I think in terms of summary points, what would you say about the survey's technology aspect?
Look, I think from my point of view, in the short term, it's clearly obvious that executives within the supply chain are going to need they're going to have to shift their focus from managing those people that, as I said, they mostly at the moment do repetitive transactional tasks. Everything from designing, moving forward, designing and managing information is going to be clearly the key here. Looking further out, I think we're going to need, as I said, a lot of specialists that work within the data area more specifically, and that's got to be a priority. So leaders need to reskill their workforce, and train people in new skills, because now they're going to be the intersection, you could say, or the conduit, I call it, between operations and technology of the business. So the challenge is going to be to create that supply chain of the future, really. And the critical roles that need to be filled they've got to start working on those right now. Very critical.
Yeah, I want to put a positive spin on it. I think it's really exciting, actually, and I think our people are up for the task, and I think that there's a lot of clever people in supply chain that have just been itching for this to happen. Because let's face it, who wants to be doing mundane tasks? Who wants to be thinking about repetitive jobs? They are really excited about where this can take them.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what companies like SYSPRO are there to do. I mean, it's not just about throwing technology into operations; it's about helping them navigate their future. That's what I'm all about. So, we really want to work with these companies to help them create value and understand the return on investment they're going to get for their business by embedding some of these disruptive technologies into their operations.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thanks so much, Rob, for joining us.
Thank you, Monique. It's been a pleasure.
Now, everyone listening can also head over to our website for the ASCI 2019 conference. The topic is so relevant to this discussion, actually. It's technology enabling human excellence in supply chain management. We're really excited about it. In fact, SYSPRO's head of marketing, Lainey Kelly, is one of our ASCI directors, and she's also on the advisory board for this conference. It's going to be a really spectacular 2 days full program of your peers talking about technology and how they've been able to move the dial both within their teams of people but also with their outputs, and also in terms of their customer experience, which is the main important factor there. So please get over to the ASCI2019.com website, where you'll also find some more information there about our awards, which will be held on the 17th of September and the 18th of September are the 2 dates of the conference. Thanks very much for joining us today. I'm Monique Fenech, and I look forward to this whole entire series where you'll hear more and more about the future of supply chain. Bye for now.